Mark! Mark!
He's wired in.
Sorry?
He's wired in.
Is he?
Yes.
How about now? You still wired in?
The man is wearing sandals. I don't need to see Oscar's toes at work. Gross! You're so educated, aren't you, Toby? So trained to deal with a hysterical woman. I don't want to look at his feet. Do your job!
Emotional agility is the ability to be with your emotions, with curiosity, compassion, and especially the courage to take values-connected steps.
I had so much promise. I was personable. I was bright. Oh, maybe not academically speaking, but I was perceptive. I always know when someone's uncomfortable at a party.
It's actually about soft skills.
Okay.
That if we made a list of what we were looking for in someone to work with or work for or marry or parent or have as a parent, the list would include very few hard skills. Right? I want someone who can type faster than anyone else. Probably not.
It's not binary. You can be decent and gifted at the same time.
Virtual executive presence. How do you show up online as your best self?
I describe people with the X factor as people who are highly confident, they're charismatic, they're enthusiastic, they're optimistic, and they're passionate about everything that they do.
Thank you everyone for joining us today for our November Fireside Chat on emotional intelligence and executive presence. My name is Brittany and I work on Heidi's team. I'll be working in the background to ensure our programming runs smoothly today. I just wanted to remind you of a few things as we start today's programming. All guests' camera will be turned off and you will also be muted for the duration of the programming. Please feel free to chat us your questions throughout the discussion to be addressed, time permitting, during the Q&A at the end. We look forward to engaging with you. Now, please, let me introduce our host, Heidi Dulebohn. Heidi is an international cultural consultant and etiquette expert. She was the first female grain trader at ConAgra and the first woman to manage a major grain exporting facility in the US before she made her career shift. Heidi trained at the International Etiquette and Protocol Academy of London, England, among other places, and now coaches emerging and established professionals on etiquette, emotional intelligence, cultural competence, and other key soft skills that can elevate your personal and professional life. Heidi, I'll turn it to you.
Oh, thank you, Brittany. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. I am just so excited for this. Thanks for carving time out of your busy days to join us. It's going to be well worth it. Today, this is the second in our series of Fireside Chats. Today, it is 2 things every leader needs to move from ordinary to extraordinary: executive presence and emotional intelligence. But first, just a very brief definition. Emotional intelligence is the ability, it's a skill that you are self-aware of your emotions. You're able to navigate them and control them and do the same with your relationships. It's something, a great skill you need that you can learn, improve, and measure. Executive presence is a combination of gravitas, communication, and appearance. It's that it factor. It's almost that intangible something. When a leader walks in a room and they have it, you know it when you see it. It's just hard to put your finger on it. Great leaders have both of these skills. And it's something you can develop both of these with coaching, focus, and a little hard work. So I am just so thrilled that we have such an esteemed panel with us to discuss this very important topic. So I would like to introduce our panelists today, please. First up is Todd Jones. Todd is the president for the mortgage division at Paramount Bank, where he's using technology to reimagine the mortgage experience for today's digital savvy consumer. With his straightforward business insights and military-honed leadership experience, he is known for building successful retail and wholesale mortgage and real estate platforms. A proud U.S. Army veteran, Todd often shares his military and business advice in workshops and speeches with groups around the country. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you, Heidi.
Our second guest is Tony Hunter. Tony is the chairman and CEO for the McClatchy Company, a publishing company. With a keen ability to lead from the front and promote enterprise-wide culture change, previously Tony led transformational efforts as a CEO for Tribune Publishing. After leaving the Tribune, Tony founded TWH Enterprises, an advisory services firm helping executives and companies to think bigger, act bolder, translate strategy into action, and align more quickly with a shared vision using his organizational agility. He is also chairman for Revolution Enterprises, an Illinois-based cannabis company. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Heidi. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And finally, we have Kathy Quinn. Kathy is president of the Q Group. She helps executives to engineer organizational changes that push their companies to category leadership. As a marketer and manager, coach and consultant, Kathy has solved challenges and delivered results for organizations like Capital One, Procter & Gamble, Estee Lauder, and many others. She helps companies to articulate and implement a strategic vision, develops leaders, create innovative cultures, surpass sales projections, and foster workplace diversity and inclusion so they can achieve goals they once thought were impossible. Welcome, Kathy.
Thanks so much, Heidi. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, we're just thrilled to have such an esteemed panel. Thank you all. So how about if we just dive into it, and we'll start with our first question. When did you realize how important emotional intelligence and executive presence were for your career success? And would you please share a story with us? Todd, may we please start with you?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Heidi.
Thank you.
I have had two really unique management development opportunities in my career, and they came in early in my career. And perhaps at the time I didn't perceive them to be specific towards emotional intelligence or even executive presence. But at the United States Military Academy at West Point, you find out very quickly, first of all, you join in with a group of very talented individuals who are all high achievers for across the board. And so they put you into roles very quickly. And as a freshman at West Point, you are a plebe, right? And you have literally 4 responses that you're even allowed to say. Yes, sir, no excuse, sir, I do not understand. And they try to hold you within those 4 responses for the majority of the half a year until you get to the academic side of things. But, and then each grade up is a different rank or role. And part of in understanding your role in an organization, you can kind of start to understand the concept of executive presence and the necessity to use your opportunity when it's your turn to be in that rank or to be in that role as the best as you possibly can. And so you know that you'll have a time where you follow, you'll have a time where you lead, and you start to understand the differences in the behaviors that are expected and accepted in either one of those roles. And so that kind of leads you toward the concept of executive presence. And as you moved up through the rank and ultimately became an officer in the military and had the opportunity to lead hundreds, if not thousands, depending on how long you stayed in, folks, you really understood that, hey, while I have this opportunity, while I'm in this role, how I present myself is going to make all the difference in the world, and how effective we are as a unit, and how much I can get a group of disparate folks to work together towards a common goal. And so I think my first understanding of executive presence was really taught to me through the rank structure at West Point and having to follow at one point, and then having the opportunity to lead, and then in how to present yourself as a leader to maximize the results that you want from your unit. The second opportunity I had and again, this was very early in my civilian career, right when I got out of the military. I was very fortunate to have what I would call a wonderful transition. Bear with me one second. I am working from home because of COVID, and I think somebody's about to walk up to my door, and that's going to cause my dog to bark. So I apologize for that. These are some of the COVID funds that we have. But we I got to go through a general management training program with an organization called Household International. And it was 6-week rotations with a trip back to the corporate headquarters between those 6-week rotations to do really management development and professional development. So to report back in front of the entire executive team, which was a big stage for a young person and they're starting off their career. And they would videotape you as you did these recordings, and you would be given feedback on the results of your project over that 6 weeks. And then they would critique you on actually how you spoke in each one of these presentations. So it was a high profile situation, and you got to see yourself over and over again on tape and understand and get critiqued on how to do better in that. All of this really shaped my understanding early on that you had, when given the opportunity to lead, when put in an executive position, there is great benefit in controlling your emotions, understanding when you feel that your emotions are going, realizing that there is a plan and how to move forward, a non-emotional, data-driven plan, and hopefully there's some hard work that goes into creating those plans up front to make them more successful, and that you have an opportunity to have a certain persona while you're in that leadership role that will help you, accomplish those plans. So those really early on in my career, when I realized that there was a such thing as an executive presence, and that emotional intelligence could help guide you from a business perspective, was my experience in the military as an officer and at West Point, which is a wonderful leadership development academy, and then also my experience in the general management training program at Household International. I'm sure we'll talk more about how that has translated into specific moments in my career since then, and happy to do that a little bit later, but that's when I first realized.
Oh, the magnificent examples. Those are really powerful examples and absolutely spot on. Thank you so much for sharing that, Todd. Thank you. Kathy, would you please tell us your thoughts?
Sure. So my first introduction to emotional intelligence happened very early in my career. I was working for a consumer products company that sold exclusively within North America. And they had put together a 3-person team. So I was one of 3 people, and we were tasked with taking this product and brand to 5 different markets in very diverse markets around the world. But the caveat was there were no other human resources afforded us, and there were no other economic resources. So my challenge was to go to the North American business team and ask them to help me source and package and distribute my product around the world and ask them to absorb the cost. So there was no upside for them at a business level, and then the individuals helping me were going to take a personal hit because of how we were evaluated for revenue purposes. So it was a challenge. I had to influence, I had to cajole, I had to persuade, and I had to innately, because I was very young in my career, I had to innately understand what it was that each person was motivated by, so I could hook into that to achieve the goals that I was challenged with. It worked, and overnight we doubled the size of that business. So it was wildly successful. But the takeaway for me was I did something innately. I didn't really have the maturity to articulate what it was, but I knew it worked, and that was something that I could leverage going forward. As I matured, what I came to realize is that was a tool, and the growth for me happened when I learned to take one tool that worked and flex it to different audiences. So part of the learning was engaging and influencing and understanding your audience is really important, and that's how you move people through to getting what you need ultimately for the good of the business. But it's not the only tool. And so maturing was helping understand lots of different motivations, lots of different styles. How can I morph myself to someone else's style? And then picking up on something Todd said, in the last 10 years, a lot of my work is focused with senior leaderships, Fortune 100 companies. And we're in a very different world than when I started my career. When I started my career, there was a very specific definition of presence, and it was this intangible gravitas, and it was a little bit of confidence and a little bit about how you command the room, and it favored an extrovert, which I am. But today, with the need for diverse teams and just the globalization, many cultural norms don't advance people who are extroverted. And so as I talk with women and people who come from different cultures and introverts, part of the training now is helping them really identify what their core strengths are and become aware of those emotions so that they can lead from from who they naturally are, lead from their strengths. If you're an introvert, there's a strength. If you come from a different culture that doesn't favor extroverted thinking like the US culture, that's great. How do we harness that? If you're a female, how do you use that and not be seen as soft or quiet or weak or harsh or whatever the different terms are that get thrown your way. So that was how I started, and it's matured, and part of it is just because the climate in which we exist has matured.
Well, that's an amazing example that, I do a lot of work with cultural competence, and that ability to sort of be authentic, but yet adapt to the situation, and especially from another culture, maybe a collective culture, it's hard to sort of be selling yourself, but you need to. So that's a terrific example. Thank you very much. And Tony, your thoughts, please.
Well, I'll make, I think Todd and Kathy have really hammered home some great points. So I'm going to give you a little time back here, and I will give just an example. Being a change agent, I learned early on that being a driven change agent doesn't get anything done. And I wondered why I kept running into the wall and why things weren't resonating with other folks until I realized and watched others use their EQ and also their presence to drive home messaging. And so I learned the hard way by failing and wondering why my ideas weren't really being implemented. And I watched other people and I just thought, wow, they are so good at that I wanted to emulate that. And I finally realized, and this goes to Kathy's point, that you have to compensate for your tendencies as well. And so I had to build a new skill set and know that I was going to react under pressure a certain way. And I had to compartmentalize that emotion and figure out how I was going to get through the tough meeting. Because inside I was churning, and as I like to say, paddling like heck under the water, calm above the water like a duck. I had to learn that. But inside I still churn when there's a big meeting. I've just learned to compensate for that tendency and know how I feel about the situation. And then the last thing I would add is it is clearly a gating issue. These two items are gating issues, because what you learn as you go up, and this is to Todd's point, as you go up, you wonder how people can have such influence over such a large scale and a number of people. And it's these two skills. The people that have these, you wonder how they're moving mountains or armies of people, to use Todd's example, right? You wonder, and it's really, they have these two skills and they've honed them, and that's how they're able to maximize their impact.
Isn't that powerful? And the beauty is these are skills that we can learn. We can improve on these skills. Thank goodness. Terrific answers. What a panel. This is so exciting. So our second question today is, as a leader, what can you do to be more self-aware? For instance, have you ever responded to someone at work, either a peer or direct report, in a way that you regret? And can you share a story, please, on how you recovered from that situation? So, Kathy, may we please start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to start with the first part of the question is, what can we do to be more self-aware? So I always look for two things, like when I'm triggered. So, and that's the most obvious. So if I'm in a conversation or some dialogue of some sort, and I'm starting to feel myself get defensive, or I feel that, the hair on the back of my neck start to go up, or in some way I'm starting to feel a resistance and a level of like perturbedness up to almost anger, then I know there's something going on. And it's something actually that has nothing to do with the conversation. It's something inside of me. So that's the first sign, like, wait, something's triggering me here. Stop, recenter myself, and kind of get to like what's causing that, because now I'm no longer listening. Now I'm starting to respond. So I look for that as a key trigger. And that's the obvious one. I also look for times when it is going so well, everything is clicking along, there's absolutely no conflict, and I'm thinking, this is amazing, this is the best thing ever, we're all in sync, we're moving in the same direction. And that actually to me is a little bit more insidious, because that's when I know I have to stop and think about who isn't being heard, what questions aren't being brought forward, who's not in the room. It's too homogenous, it's going too perfect. So I look for the trigger where there's discomfort, but then I also am really cognizant of when there isn't any resistance at all, because that's a clue for me that it's a like-minded group and we're leaving out a lot of possibilities. And so an example of getting triggered, and by the way, this happens to every single one of us. And sometimes we're prepared for it. Sometimes if we're tired, if we're stressed, it hits us a little bit more rapidly. But I do a lot of work with senior teams. I was working with the senior executive team. It's the CEO, the COO, the C-suite. And one of the presidents of the division for a group meeting was really intent on making sure that I understood all the issues with her fellow colleagues. She was really clear about their deficits and what they needed to do to improve. And so, and she had a very aggressive style. And so she attacked me after a meeting, so that it was clear to me that she didn't think I could do my job, that I didn't understand her, and I wasn't addressing it in the right way. And it was a very long day. And so it was, at first I could feel myself like matching her emotion and wanting to, meet her with the same energy level. And I did a little bit, and then I was like, just stop, recenter yourself, validate her feelings, turn it so that she hears that you're hearing her, commit to nothing, and do what you normally counsel people to do, validate the feelings, don't address the content. And it worked. The next day she came up to me with a long apology. Her emotions got the better of her, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, it's easy. It's easy no matter how many years in business, no matter who you are, no matter what your background is. It is easy to let someone else's emotion and anger take you off kilter. And you have to be able to at some point stop yourself, recenter, and get out of the emotion and get back into your head.
Well, that's a terrific example, because it sounds like you're a very empathetic leader as well. That's your empathy was kicking in there, and to be that self-aware, it's hard, but luckily we can learn this. And to know these triggers, that's great. Thank you, Kathy. Tony, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to use an example. My first formal 360 evaluation process at Tribune, which I thought things were going great. I didn't think I was offending anyone. I thought everything was great. I got a 360 from one of my peers, and three things came out. One, my intensity was intimidating, and people were becoming intimidated by my intensity. The second thing I got was being focused and head down, working during the day or with the desktop. Back in the day, I'm dating myself. And the last thing was in meetings, I might as well had a bubble above my head and said something like, "That's a dumb idea," by my body language. And it was the most powerful, pivotal moment of my career, and I wanted to cry, frankly.
Wow.
I literally wanted to cry because I was not aware of how others were reacting to me, and my intentions were the opposite of what the outcome was. And so that moment I can point to, and I can remember where I sat in his office and what he was wearing that day.
Wow.
It's so powerful. So I think it speaks to, again, getting feedback, making sure you're checking, and compensating again for what you normally do, your tendencies. My tendency is to be intense. Now I use humor. Now I use a lot of other things that I normally didn't use in business because I didn't think that was appropriate. So this one, to me, have I offended people? Yeah, I've offended people. In some cases, I didn't even know it. And in some cases, they were being put off and I was not aware. So that moment in time was critical for my career.
Wow, that sounds very powerful. And it is amazing how our self-perception can be so different. You know, these 360s are marvelous for that. And I've had some myself and learned some things about myself. And yeah, it's amazing. God, thank you for sharing that. That must have been some moment. But isn't it amazing? In those moments, you even remember like what the fellow had on. It's that powerful of a moment to you, and you're learning these things, and these little things stay with you in your mind. But wow, thank you for sharing that. Todd, would you please give us your thoughts on being more self-aware?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, first of all, I absolutely recognize a lot of both of what Kathy and Tony are talking about there. Kathy's point about when things are when there's no triggers is really, really good. I think that type of the highlighting groupthink is something that I'm taking notes down here for myself. I just had everybody in our executive team do a personality, one of these, human intelligence type of deals. And we were looking for where we had too many similarities and where we needed a little bit more diversity in our executive team. And that just really speaks volumes to me. So, and then from Tony's standpoint, it's not a one-time thing for me. Every time I've had a review, I hear it on a regular basis. You can't probably tell from the TV, but I'm a pretty large person. And I get the intimidating comments consistently. And it's something that I have to work against in my tone of voice and how I greet people, and to try to start meetings and end meetings to help them not feel as intimidated. I can be short and to the point and intense, and I actually appreciate that type of tempo and how I work. And so the combination of both my looks and the vibe and that kind of hot tempo can be very off-putting to certain people, and certainly doesn't fit that. You don't want, you're not going to be as productive if people are all scared around the table. So that's something I have to deal with on a regular basis. I have absolutely a story. I take great effort to try to contain and understand those triggers when I feel them as well. But what I've come to realize well into my career, as recently as last year, is that when I have my hardest time, it's around what I call sacred cows. So part of my leadership philosophy, and I take great pride in, is the concept of servant leadership. My definition of servant leadership really is that do all the work up front really, really hard to align your goals with your people's goals. Therefore, you can just focus on them accomplishing their goals and getting, hitting their life goals and their highest tiers, right? And so through that focus on them, they feel like you're really there working for them, which in reality you kind of are. And so when I've had instances where I have taken great measures to try to put the right people in the right seats, but I don't always do that correctly, and my team doesn't always do that correctly. I can think about one instance about a year ago. It was a budget and planning conversation. It was a 2-day offsite, so this is our entire executive team. And earlier in that year, I had selected a very talented professional to take a role over all of sales in our organization. And while he was an absolute subject matter expert and a sales professional, that role was not necessarily right for him. And so I had the right person in the wrong seat. And so I had moved prior to that budgeting and planning to rectify that and get him into the right seat. And I feel like we had successfully done that. But because he had been in the wrong seat and I had put him there, there had been great consternation about his capabilities to do the job, et cetera. And it caused a lot of conflict between our operations and our sales and other members of the executive team. And so in my mind, I felt particularly triggered. Well, I had made the move, I had rectified the situation to get him in the right seat, and I had communicated with everybody what the plan was going to be. And what I wasn't prepared for is for that to continue to be a topic of conversation at this meeting. And so because I felt like I had failed him to some degree by putting him in the wrong seat, and I felt like it was largely my responsibility, when this came up in a rather snarky type of comment and way, I completely triggered and completely did not control myself and just F-bombed the heck out of this SVP, which was completely inappropriate communication at the time. And then I realized, what I had done, and I sat down later in a one-on-one session, but this was in front of everybody. It was not the look that I was going for, and certainly not the tone that I wanted to set for the entire deal. I apologized to everybody shortly after a break, and then I went and sat one-on-one with that individual, and I explained very clearly what had happened. Look, this is why I responded the way I did, and this is what I felt like you were doing. I recognize that this is really more about myself and the fact that I felt like I let him down, and I don't really want to rehash or dance on his grave or cause him, and I don't want him to feel like people are talking bad about him with his current executive team, of which he was once a member of. And so this is why I responded the way that I did. And it was good enough to help bridge that, but certainly there was damage done in that moment. And so, with emotional intelligence, it's just so important to get it right. It's so important to not allow yourself to slip down that. If you do make a mistake, it certainly doesn't mean you can't come back from it, but understand probably even with emotional intelligence, if you mess up towards the negative, or if you have an explosion towards the negative, it's going to maybe even be more impactful than if you do it right every single day of the week, right? And so understanding those triggers, understanding how you come across to other folks, it matters. And it's something that, I feel like I personally have to work on all the time, because I walk in looking the way that I look, the size that I am, kind of have a military presence about me to begin with, and people automatically get intimidated. So I got to go out of my way to make sure that I don't lose it, don't scare people further, and try to create a fun environment where we can actually collaborate and feel good that your ideas are heard and everybody feels comfortable in moving towards that common goal.
Oh, that's wonderful. Gosh, thank you for being willing to share that. But so as you can see, being self-aware is where emotional intelligence starts. That's the beginning of the whole thing. So and thank you for our audience to be able to hear those stories from each of you. They're very powerful, and it just drives home the point of how important these subjects are today. So for our next question, let's talk, when in the leadership journey should you begin to build or emphasize the importance of EQ and EP? And how do you build them in the real world where challenges of enterprise beckon? So may we please start with Todd again? Would you mind, Todd, just jumping right back in?
All right. I'm going to have to ask you to repeat the question. I hate to do that, Heidi.
Oh, sure. No problem. So when in the leadership journey should you begin to build or emphasize the importance of your EQ and your EP? Should you start day one or wait till you've really made it? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the first thing is to recognize that it matters, right? And so we talked about this in another story of substance versus, just kind of looks. I mean, I think you need to start early. And I think you need to understand, do a self-assessment. These 360 assessments that folks do at organizations are particularly useful. We try to kind of operate by the EOS, the entrepreneurship, or entrepreneurship operating system. And so we try to create a concept of consistently reinforcing concepts through data and through set meetings in organization with all of our staff. And so anybody who comes in our organization is going to understand a little bit through the training that we do up front in the reinforcement meetings, that they have an opportunity to present and to work with others in the organization in a more maximized way by understanding how they come across as well too. And so I think it's something you develop early on. I think if you understand that, just like any professional athlete, like a baseball player, right? They don't just walk out and start batting. They sit and warm up, circle for 5 minutes ahead of time, warming up, getting ready, seeing the speed of the pitches, understanding what's going to take place. They practice incessantly every day that they're not in the game. So there's really nothing but practice is what they do. 98% of what they do is practice for the game. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in or sport. If you're a professional, you need to practice. And if you are like every other human in the entire world, you have triggers and things that are going to make you upset. So you can practice understanding when you feel those emotions rise up. You can practice turning the conversation towards facts and data and being able to listen actively, hear what's the other person saying, understand why it's affecting you in the way that it is, and use intelligent questions to steer the conversation back towards the point, or perhaps use those questions to reinforce the person's point. Maybe they're exactly right on, and you just need to hear it in a couple different ways, clarify that it's not your biggest concern it's not to hurt you or to trigger you. It's just real data that needs to be addressed. So I believe it's something you need to understand early on, that it matters, that every role can be performed better or worse, and the tools that can help you perform any specific role, whether it be an executive role or even a line role, there are tools that can help you perform each one of those better. So practice them. And if your intention is to be an executive, then practice your emotional intelligence and practice your executive presence, believe that it matters, and start to work on it. And ask for reinforcement from others each and every day that you have the opportunity. If you've got people who care about you, if you've got people you work with on a regular basis, ask for that feedback specifically, because that's how you're going to be the professional that you want to be.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, thank you, Todd. That's absolutely so true. Kathy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I really appreciated what Todd just said, and I 100% agree with everything he said. This starts on day one. I know we historically had this notion that you're a subject matter expert and you go through your career and you move up the ranks and you're honing that specific discipline, and then somehow someday you get made a director or a VP or a senior VP, and magically you're supposed to have these skills that enable you now to lead people. And it's not that bifurcated, and it can't be that bifurcated. It's not here are the subject matter skills that make you the expert, and now here are the people skills that suddenly you have to know. It's the same issue, they're just different dimensions. So with subject matter expertise has to go that emotional intelligence, and out of that will come executive presence. They're not separated. And I know we've talked quite a bit about moving through the ranks and getting to those executive levels of leadership. But the truth is, today's organizations are smaller and they're flatter. And I've talked a lot with people who are at the midpoint in their career, and we talk about leading from where you are. I don't care what your title is. You have the ability every single day to elevate all the boats around you, right? It's not about go make yourself a star. If you want to be a leader, how do you elevate everyone? And that is teaching people at a very, very early level, as they're learning about their subject matter expertise, as they're becoming expert, like, how are you bringing people along? How are you even thinking about what your role is? Is your role to advance your career, or is your role to build this business? And what does that then mean? Who's required? So I am finding that just the way we're working today is taking that concept of executive presence underpinned by, emotional intelligence. You can't have presence without the awareness, and bringing it lower and lower into the organization. And then to Todd's point, a lot of organizations have some mechanism. So you do a disc analysis or person analysis or whatever you're doing. And then you're done. And then you run around with your piece of paper and you're like, I'm green on the disc analysis. But everyone else is a yellow and you're wondering why you don't fit in. The challenge then comes, can you help people understand who you are, but now use that to morph and understand someone else? That's the real challenge. And that's where I really focus with people. The world isn't going to adapt to you. You're not going to hold up your Myers-Briggs or your disc, analysis and have people suddenly know how to talk to you. It's like, how can you learn to understand what someone else is, even if you never saw their disc analysis, and adapt to that person? That takes outside support. That takes the organization bringing in resources. And at a minimum, if your company doesn't do that, to Todd's big point, ask for feedback. Check in with people. You know what? I'm going on a lot. How does that land with you? What are your thoughts? How are you hearing me? Because otherwise, you're just talking into a vacuum. So if the organization can't support it, at least you on your own can begin to figure out different ways to solicit that feedback.
I think that's an extremely important point, that, yeah, through this feedback, as we were saying earlier, your self-perception could be completely off. And so it's just very important early on. Thank you, Kathy. Tony, what are your thoughts? When should we build and emphasize the importance of EQ and EP?
I love when I get to go last, because I'm just going to ladder on the great points before me. This is working out great, Todd. I'm glad you're going first, just like we planned. Way to go, Kathy. Hang with me, bro. I love it. I'm going to just ladder on their points. I don't have really anything new. I think Kathy's point with respect to no matter where you're at in your journey, you need to be working on these things to broaden your capabilities and to position yourself for the next thing you want to do. Doesn't mean up, as Kathy said, right? It's about influence. And I want to use what Todd was talking about. I think of outliers, right? 10,000 hours. Well, you better start early. I mean, if this is important to your journey, you need to start early, because practice. And I think another point here is running, managing is one thing, right? You better have some emotional intelligence to lead, to manage people. But if you want to lead and you want to bring a bunch of folks with you somewhere different than where you're at today, you have to have presence. You have to. How that it manifests itself is different, as we've all talked about, but I think you have to be able to communicate powerfully, prolifically. You got to handle yourself. You have to have that calm presence that people are willing to follow you somewhere. So I don't have much to add other than to ladder on their points, that start early, watch others. I love to read about other industries, adaptive innovation, and learning from other people in a safe setting instead of on the job. Those are things that, at least in my career, I've looked to emulate others and use their circumstances. And last, I would say planning and preparation for meetings, even if it's 5 minutes. It's a dirty little secret, but 5 minutes of prep and using your EQ and preparing yourself to be present and not just making the donuts and moving from meeting to meeting to meeting is another dirty little secret I've found can improve your productivity 50% in a meeting if you just take 5 minutes to get yourself in the right place before you walk in. So that's all I have to add to those great answers before me.
Yeah, what terrific answers. And it just goes to the importance that you cannot be a great leader without both of these skills. It takes both of these, and it takes practice. You don't get them overnight, but you should start as early as you can. Well, we only have a couple of questions left, so we might have to just sort of speed it up here a little bit to stay on our schedule. So our next question is, How have you dealt with individuals in high positions who lack EQ and EP? I tell you what, let's start with Kathy, please, if you'd be so kind.
Okay, well, this is pretty much the norm, right? I mean, this is when I'm going into an organization, either I'm working with an executive who's lacking EQ and EP, or there are people on the senior leadership team that's been the feedback. And so if you're working with the leader, it's a form of a 360, but I do it a little bit differently. You share like some general consensus of what, how people are seeing and hearing. So you give them some feedback and you start to talk about, is that really what you want to, come across as, and then some skills and techniques for shifting it. More often than not, you're dealing with someone who lacks EQ and EP, and you can't change them. They're your boss in the hierarchy. Even if you're a chief something or other, you're still reporting up to someone. They're not going to change. And so the bigger skill comes from, again, helping people understand, what do we know about this other person? Understand yourself, and now let's use it to develop a little bit X-ray vision about who this other person is. What do we know about what's important to them? And we know that by their bearing. How are they standing? How do they talk? What are the things they focus on? Before they even say a word, we begin to have a sense of who and what they're about. So it's peeling back the onion, doing a little bit of not diagnosing, but just trying to understand, like, what's their worldview, so that you're not going to change them, but you can adapt to that person. If you're Todd and you're a little more like a boom, boom, boom efficiency in the conversation, I would never go to Todd and have a long rambling story that takes 30 minutes. I'd go in there with my bullet points, boom, 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 boom. And here's the ask. Like, so begin to communicate and reflect back to the other person in a way that they can hear you. And so I think about it as it's another language, and you have to adapt to their language. And you cannot take it personally, because again, if you understand they're going to react how they're going to react, you begin to get that it's not personal.
Right, it's not personal. Yeah, that's very interesting. Tony, what are your thoughts, please?
Well, I'm going to continue on the theme Kathy was on about if it's someone you report to. In addition to what Kathy has said, the other thing, it's tricky. I've done it well. I've done it poorly. I'm getting better, but I think boundaries. It's one thing for people to behave a certain way and for a boss to have a certain style and maybe lack EQ, but I think having boundaries, when they cross those boundaries, calling them out is important. Yep. Because if you don't, it'll continue. I've done that well and not so well. But I think that's a critical thing. I also think that if it's a peer or it's someone you don't report to, depending on your relationship with them, I think, having a one-on-one and giving them some feedback that could be helpful. And that's in the case, not where Kathy has said they're not going to change, but they're not aware. They just missed it. They missed the cue. I've seen that a lot, and I feel bad in those meetings when you see it happening and they don't. And so I think outside the meeting, if you can go help someone, this is Todd's point about being a servant leader, by the way, being selfless and taking a little risk to help somebody. And then I think managing up is another skill that I think fits this. Your boss might say, I want you to go talk to Todd, tell Todd if that ever happens again, Todd's going to be fired, right? Ever, rough. And you're like, yes, ma'am or sir, I'll get right on that. And you go meet with Todd, and you don't just let that go right through you to Todd. You present that because you have more circumstances and you understand and you have some EQ, you present that in a whole different way. And I think as you get to higher levels, you get that. But sometimes when you're a manager or a director and you get that message, it just flows right through them to you and through you to your employee. And I think that's another skill that I say managing up, meaning you get to the outcome you want, but you do it your way. And I think that takes courage. But then when the boss asks you, of course you say, oh, I told Todd, I set him straight. He'll be just fine now. But I think that's another skill to deal with people that don't necessarily have the EQ in their repertoire.
Boy, yeah, that's just the epitome of servant leadership. That's really, really boy, our audience is so lucky today getting these, just what a terrific conversation. So this is, and we want to hear from Todd now. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that Tony and Kathy did a great job there. I want to go back on that 5-minute prepping for the meeting comment that Tony made. Like that is gold, because everybody can feel when somebody is prepared for a meeting and has it put together, and that is executive presence as well too. So I want to highlight that doubly. Dealing with people who don't have executive presence or emotional intelligence. I think emotional intelligence is probably harder a little bit because you can have some really disruptive type of conversations sometimes that can be keyed off, and if not control, emails particularly interesting because some people will fire off, like try to do the last word game on emails sometimes, and emails are almost always misconstrued from a tone perspective to begin with. And so I see a lot of opportunity to work with people in that regard. Some people are, and I don't know if I'm using the exact correct term, but maybe more on the passive aggressive side, and they like the barrier of that email and they feel empowered to send something that can be really considered disruptive. So often we see instances in that regard and how we communicate. And so it's much more difficult to say something that is emotionally driven and ego driven versus data driven in an email and just shoot it off than to actually have the conversation with somebody. So in almost every day of my work, when we have a conflict that pops up, and maybe it's not always driven by emotional intelligence, but certainly emotions have gotten into it. It's time to circle up and have everybody hop on a phone call together, and then I kind of play referee a little bit and just talk through it, because there's always more to each side. And typically by the time you get done with it, what you discovered is why this person was frustrated over here. Is there something that could have kept that from happening? And hey, that was never this person's intention to frustrate them in the first point. They just didn't really understand where they were coming from. And so I find, and it kind of speaks to what Tony was talking about too. If you don't step in there and you just say, hey, go talk to that person, tell them that, clear this up, if you will. And they're not equipped to go actually manage that process. You could end up with making a situation perhaps worse and not better. And so developing all your leadership, really all your employees to think in this way and to understand that few and far between should it really all be emotional. Should your emotions be triggering? They really, most of the time, somebody's not actually trying to harm you or to take you off. Sometimes they might not be doing something you would hope that they would be doing. That's a conversation that could take place, and you can reset expectations moving in the future and hopefully resolve. So that's kind of how I would deal with it. I did have Kathy brought up the Myers-Briggs stuff too, and hey, you can't really just learn how to communicate with somebody off of that. I do want to bring up one example because this just happened to me. This is with a very important executive in my circle, and her primary trait, according to this test that we took, was self-reliance. And she has worked her way up through the industry based off of, for sure, in her opinion, her self-reliance and ability to execute on things. Incredibly brilliant person. And, but the way that I am geared as, let's just say, team-oriented, blah, 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 this test actually said to me, it put a big caution sign on there, because I was looking at my results versus their results, and it'll tell you actually how to communicate. Like, this is what you guys should be looking for. Here are your common areas. And oh, by the way, if you're too common, it'll be like, you two are going to create groupthink. Like, you're never going to disagree on anything, right? So be careful with that. But this caution sign was, you will hear her self-reliance as selfishness, and you need to understand that that's not at all what's coming across. And when I read that one sentence, I was like, the doors cracked open, because so many times I had sat back after a conversation and been like, why is that all about her? And they're like, why does she think that's all about her? And why is she getting upset about that? Da, 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 da. And it cracked the entire thing open for me. So she's very self-aware. I think she has great emotional intelligence. I work on my emotional intelligence. I'm at least cognizant of it. And but it wasn't until I really understood the communication difference, like what Kathy was talking about, like, this is a different person who thinks differently, and I need to speak their language. I'm not messing around. I mean, it has fundamentally changed our relationship. And so you have to tailor how you communicate, whether it's somebody who does or does not have emotional intelligence. Each person you're working with, get to know them, take the 5 minutes to prepare, figure out how this person communicates differently, get in there, and you'll have whatever the goal is that you're trying to accomplish, you'll be much more likely to reach it.
Oh, that's terrific. And thank you so much. I think everyone got these real life examples that were extraordinary. And as you can see, our 3 panelists have executive presence and emotional intelligence in abundance. So thank you so much for sharing today. And I think Brittany is going to jump in and we're going to do some Q&As if that's all right with everybody.
Definitely. Thank you, Heidi. And thank you to everyone who's been communicating via chat. We've got some great questions, and I know we're bumping up against the 1-hour time limit, but we might go over a few minutes. We want to answer a few of these questions. And as always, we'll have follow-ups. This will be recorded and placed on Heidi's website, so you'll be able to go back. But we have one question here for Tony. You need different levels of EQ and EP at different times in your career, especially in the midst of disruption and change. Those times seem to happen more and more frequently. How are you developing these skills in others? And then can you share how you're developing these skills yourself?
I'm over budget on disruption being in publishing. Let's just start there. Seems like every day something else disrupts our business model. But let's start with others. No surprise, the best way to teach others is to lead by example and share your thoughts on topics, but also how you behave and how you address disruption. And others will follow those behaviors and that presence, if you will. So I think you as a leader have to lead from the front, and your messaging has to be really clear to people that this is going to be okay. And the tools you use every day the people that work with you will eventually see those work, hopefully. And as I like to say, if I have a good idea, it's yours. And if I have a bad idea, it's mine. So by leading by example, I think is the most important way. I use everything. I need a lot of help. So I need a lot of coaching. So I love to watch others. I love to read about leadership. I love to read about other industries. I like to steal ideas from other industries. I think there's just a number of ways to stay current and relevant, because the circumstances change every day. So you can't take one playbook and apply it. So while I think I can be like a duck, something will happen later today, whether it be a Twitter feed or something that'll get my emotions up, like Kathy mentioned earlier. And I have to go right back to teaching myself how not to react viscerally to that. And so you're never done is one of the lines I would use. You're never done. We're not robots. We're people. And so making it a focus. And by the way, if you want to be great, putting in the work. I go back to Todd's point. You don't just walk out of the dugout and go to the major league. You practice, practice, practice. And so I don't think there's a silver bullet at all. I think it's taking every tool available to you, but putting in the extra effort, because that's what outliers are. And that's what greatness is. I don't even know if I answered the question at this point after all that.
Well, thank you, Tony. That was a wonderful answer. And we have a question that kind of piggybacks on that I'd love to pass your way, Kathy. Somebody was asking, do you have any tips with EQ and EP during this virtual world that we're living in due to the pandemic? So there's a different way that this is kind of exuberated through digital, a lot of video. So can you share a few tips that you would share with other leaders on EQ and EP in a virtual world?
Yes. So this comes up a lot. So I really appreciate the question. It's imperative more than ever to just do more frequent check-ins with people. And we're on Zoom a lot, we're on video a lot. You don't have to have every communication be on Zoom. You could just pick up the phone and talk, that's also acceptable. Suddenly we went to Zoom world and we forgot. Sometimes it's just easier to talk on the phone. I encourage a lot of my clients to walk and get outside and get some fresh air. It kind of lowers whatever agitation they're feeling. You can walk and talk. So one is more frequent communication, like checking in all the time and just checking in. Like, it doesn't have to be about work. We're so efficiency minded that all we're focused on is getting it done, getting it done, getting it done. Yet people's anxiety and depression is amped way up. I think I had heard some statistics about depression in America pre-COVID, which were pretty devastating because the numbers were off the chart. During COVID, it's like, it's exponentially worse. So you have to assume as a leader that your team, your people are living under this pressure just because it's out in the atmosphere. And so if every call is about get in and get out and be efficient, that doesn't take care of that stress. So just checking in on a very personal level. How are you? How are things going? Just want to see what are you doing? What did you watch on Netflix? Have you made any time to just do nothing? That is imperative. And again, it's not what people want to hear because they have Zoom fatigue or they're like, I'm on the phone all day. You are, but if you actually want to make people be more productive, we have to lower that stress. And you do that by talking to them like human beings. If it's all around a subject that is work related, you're just reinforcing the pressures that they're under.
Bravo.
Yeah.
What a great answer. Bravo.
Yeah,
I'm taking notes on that one.
That was great. I just want to thank all of our guests. What a marvelous, candid conversation and with some really solid takeaways. And here are some from our experts today. This was an amazing hour. Thank you so much to Kathy, Todd, and Tony for giving us an hour of your time. And thank you to the audience for giving us your hour to tune in. I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did too. So everyone, please stay smart, stay safe, go out, find a coach, and you can improve your emotional intelligence and your executive presence. And as always, everyone, please be kind. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done, Heidi.
Thank you.